I was in the kitchen, folding towels when the doorbell rang. Same dull ring it's had for 20 years. For a second, I thought it was just the mailman dropping off the vitamins I ordered. But instead, a man in a neat blue polo shirt handed me a thick envelope. He didn't say much, just asked if I was Agnes Clark, gave me the papers, and left. My hands shook as I opened it right there by the sink. The paper said my house had been sold. My name, my real name, was written in a signature I had never signed. I felt the air leave my chest, replaced with something heavy and cold. That's when Jason walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd just fixed something. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't nervous. He just looked at me with this cold smile and said, "It's already sold." The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I wondered if maybe I was losing my mind, like Claire sometimes hinted whenever I misplaced my glasses. But no, this wasn't confusion. This was theft. My own son had stolen my home. I steadied myself, set the papers on the counter, and asked, "Did you forge my signature, Jason?" He tilted his head like he was pretending to think, then shrugged. "It's done," he said, "as if selling your mother's house without her permission was no bigger deal than buying groceries." I wanted to collapse, but I refused to give him the satisfaction. I turned to the beige landline that's been hanging on my kitchen wall since 1989 and slowly dialed 911, one number at a time, while staring straight at him. When the dispatcher answered, I forced my voice steady and said, "My son forged my name. He's standing in my kitchen, and I need help." For the first time, his smirk slipped. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, like it was finally sinking in that I wasn't as weak as he thought. I kept my hand over the phone like I was guarding something precious, watching him the way I used to when he was a baby, studying every move. But this time, there was no tenderness left, only anger, and a kind of grief I couldn't put into words. As I waited for the police, the years started playing back in my mind. Jason was my only child, the boy who sat on this same kitchen counter, swinging his little legs, begging me to pack 2 pudding cups in his lunchbox. The boy I worked double shifts to raise after his father died, while he pretended he stayed home to take care of me, when really he just couldn't keep a job. When he finally moved out with Claire, I even gave them $5,000 to help buy their first house. I told myself that's what family does. But over the years, Jason kept coming back with failed business schemes and excuses for why nothing was his fault. 6 months ago, he started hinting I should sell the house and move into assisted living. He said it was too much for me. I thought he cared. Turns out, he was just circling like a vulture, waiting to take what I built. When I told Jason I wasn't ready to leave my home, he acted like he dropped the subject, or at least, that's what I thought. But a week later, I noticed the folder with my house deed was missing from my desk. When I asked him about it, he laughed like I was just a forgetful old woman. "Mom, you probably misplaced it again," he said. But the way his eyes flicked toward Claire, and the way she looked away so quickly, made my stomach twist. Even then, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I told myself I was just nervous, maybe getting older, maybe too suspicious. But when those papers showed up today, proving the house had been sold without me, I knew I hadn't imagined a thing. All those little kindnesses, offering to help with bills, suggesting I downsize, telling me I deserved to rest, it was all part of this. I could hear Jason pacing the hallway, muttering under his breath, probably scrambling to figure out how to spin this before the sirens arrived. I looked around my kitchen and saw every memory pressed into those walls. Christmas dinners, birthday cakes, quiet mornings with a cup of instant coffee and the crossword. This wasn't just a house, it was my life, and he'd signed it away like it meant nothing. When I heard car doors slam outside, I pressed the phone back to my ear and told the dispatcher, "They're here." She told me to keep the line open. My hands didn't shake anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't fragile. I was done pretending that this was love. 2 officers stepped into my kitchen, calm and professional, introducing themselves like they were just here to check a smoke alarm. Jason stood behind them, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. I handed the envelope to the taller officer, a woman with her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her badge read Officer Medina. She flipped through the papers while I explained, as clearly as I could, that I had never signed them. Jason gave a little laugh, acting like I was embarrassing him in front of strangers. "Mom, you really think anyone's going to believe this?" he said. For just a second, I almost wondered if I sounded crazy as standing there in my house slippers, accusing my own son, But then Officer Medina looked up and asked if I had proof of my real signature. I nodded and went to the hall closet where I kept my old tax records and the original DID. My hands were steady as I pulled out the folder, like I'd been practicing this moment in my mind, without realizing it. I laid the deed on the kitchen table, showing the signature I'd written 15 years ago at the credit union. The officer compared it with the fake one on the new papers. You didn't need to be an expert to see they didn't match. That's when Jason started talking fast, his voice higher than usual, insisting I'd asked him to handle the sale because I couldn't keep up with the property taxes. My patience snapped. I turned to him and said firmly, I didn't authorize a single thing. Officer Medina asked if I was willing to make a formal statement. I said yes before she even finished. Jason tried to argue, but she shut him down with a raised hand. Then she told him he would need to leave the house until the matter was resolved. His face went blank. It was like he never believed it would go this far. He tried to meet my eyes, maybe hoping I'd back down, but I looked straight past him and asked Officer Medina what came next. She told me I could file a report and take the documents to the county recorder's office to put a stop to the transfer. For the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. Jason walked out without a word. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any argument. When the officers left too, I picked up the phone and called the county clerk's office. Myself, a man named Derek answered, his voice calm as I explained my property was being stolen. He told me to bring everything in the next morning, and he'd help me sort it out. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table where Jason had stood just hours before. I placed my hand flat on the deed until the paper warmed beneath my skin. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I knew exactly what had happened, and I promised myself I would see it through to the end. I didn't sleep that night, not for a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's face at the moment he realized I wasn't going to let him get away with it. At 7 the next morning, I put on a clean blouse, tucked the deed and forged documents into a zippered tote, and drove myself to the county clerk's office. Derek met me at the counter, a thin man with a neat beard, the kind of person who looked like he'd seen this kind of mess before. He asked for my ID and the papers, then disappeared behind a frosted glass door. When Derek came back, he was holding a printed record that showed the house transfer had already been filed 3 days ago under my name. He tapped the signature line with his pen and said softly, "This isn't the same handwriting as before." I nodded, because we both knew exactly what that meant. He helped me fill out a fraud affidavit and showed me how to put a hold on the property title so nothing else could happen until an investigation was finished. It took almost 2 hours. By the time I walked out of that office, I felt the same bone-deep exhaustion I used to get after working double shifts at the library, that hollow ache in the chest that comes from carrying too much. Still, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the police department and asked to speak with Officer Medina. She met me in the lobby, looked over the affidavit, and told me they could move forward with pressing charges. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel regret. All I felt was relief, like I was finally standing up for myself, something I should have done a long time ago. When she asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint, I said yes without hesitation. She nodded, stepped away to make a call, and less than an hour later, Jason showed up at my front door. I watched from the window as he walked up the driveway, jingling his keys like he planned to just walk in and act like nothing had happened. 2 officers met him outside, spoke quietly, then turned him around and cuffed his wrists. His head dropped, but he didn't say a word, not even when they led him to the patrol car. I stood by the kitchen sink, my hand pressed against the cold counter to steady myself, and thought about how many chances I had given him to do better. The officers didn't knock afterward, they just left. The neighborhood fell quiet again, too quiet. Only after the car pulled away did I pick up the phone and call Maria, my oldest friend. When she answered, I skipped small talk and just said, "He's been arrested. It's really happening." She asked if I was okay, and I told her the truth. I didn't know yet, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally choosing what happened next, instead of just letting life happen to me. Maria came over that evening with a bag of takeout and the kind of worried look people give you when they're not sure if you're going to cry or throw plates. I did neither. I sat at the kitchen table and told her everything from the first time. Jason asked me to sign routine paperwork to the moment I saw him being cuffed in my driveway. She didn't interrupt, just slid a carton of chow mein toward me and said she was proud I'd stood up for myself. An hour after she left, my phone started buzzing. At first, I thought it was spam, some scam texts, but when I looked, I saw Jason's Facebook post already racking up likes and comments. He had posted an old picture of me holding him as a baby, along with a long caption claiming he was protecting me from predatory investors because I was too confused to manage the house anymore. My stomach clenched so hard I had to put the phone down. Strangers I hadn't seen in years were commenting, some saying they were sorry for him, others calling me selfish. And then I saw it. Teresa's name. My own daughter. She'd written that she was sorry Jason had to go through this alone. The numbness I'd been carrying snapped into something sharp, almost electric. I called Teresa immediately. Her voice sounded thin and rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this. She told me Jason had shown her paperwork, said I was slipping mentally, and that maybe it was time for me to consider care options. "Do you really believe that?" I asked. There was a long pause before she said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." I hung up before she could finish. I sat in the quiet kitchen with my phone face down on the table. I thought about how many years I had spent convincing myself that my children were good people, that they meant well even when they lied, even when they took advantage. The phone kept buzzing with more notifications. Strangers weighing in on my life, drip by drip. That's when I realized Jason wasn't just trying to steal my house. He was trying to steal my reputation too. I picked up my phone again, opened the voice memos, and found the recording I had started that morning when Jason first admitted everything in the kitchen. My thumb hovered over the share button. For a moment, I wondered if posting it would make me just as petty as him. Then I pressed send. When I shared the recording, I didn't add a long explanation. I just wrote, "Here is the truth." Then I logged off and left my phone in the living room, because no matter what people said next, I wasn't going to let Jason's version of the story be the only one out there. The next morning, I woke up to more notifications than I'd ever seen in my life, but this time, the comments were different. People were sharing the recording, Jason's own voice admitting he'd signed the papers himself. Some people apologized. Some quietly deleted the nasty things they'd written. Most just went silent. It didn't feel like victory, it just felt draining. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my folder of documents, and started calling every elder law attorney in the county. Most offices said they were booked for weeks, or that they didn't take cases like mine. By late afternoon, though, I reached an office where the receptionist transferred me directly to a man named Alan Barnes. His voice sounded flat and routine. I explained what happened. Then I heard a shift in his tone, sharp and focused, like a switch had flipped. He told me to bring every piece of evidence I had to his office the next morning. Walking into that office felt like walking into a final exam I hadn't studied for. But Alan greeted me with a firm handshake and told me to sit down. I laid everything on his desk, the affidavits, the forged deed, my original documents, the police report, and even a printed transcript of the recording. He read them all twice, tapping his pen against the desk, and finally looked at me. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Your son committed fraud," he said. "He leveraged your property without your consent. If he's smart, he'll settle before this reaches a jury." I didn't know if I wanted to cry or thank him. Maybe both. He drafted a complaint that afternoon, while I sat in the corner chair, clutching my tote bag like it was a life vest. Before I left, he warned me, "People like Jason don't just give up. They try to wear you down until you stop fighting." I told him I wasn't planning to stop. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Teresa. She said she didn't appreciate me airing private family matters in public, that I should have handled this quietly. I deleted it halfway through. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen I'd stood in 100 times before, but now it felt different. The table, the cabinets, even the old landline on the wall, this was mine. And for once, I was ready to defend it. I didn't feel ashamed for taking it this far. If anything, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground after years of letting everyone else decide what I was worth. A week later, Alan called me early in the morning. He said he had something I needed to see. I drove to his office expecting paperwork, a new filing, or a court date. But when I walked in, he was already waiting by the door with an envelope in his hand. He said a woman had dropped it off without leaving her name until he pressed her for it. It was Rosa Alvarez, the nanny, who lived next door to Jason and Claire, the same Rosa I used to wave to over the hedge when she walked the kids to school. Alan slid a USB drive into his computer and pulled up a video. The footage was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone set up on a kitchen counter. My heart started pounding before I even understood what I was looking at. There was Jason, sitting at my dining table with Claire right beside him. A stack of papers was spread out in front of them, my deed right on top. Jason muttered that he'd practiced my signature enough times that no one would ever notice, and Claire, holding her phone, said she was filming just in case. I wasn't even in the video, but watching it felt like watching someone take me apart piece by piece. My name, my home, my life, treated like it was theirs to play with. When the clip ended, the office was silent. Alan finally turned to me and said, "This is the strongest evidence I've ever seen in a forgery case." I just nodded, because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure my voice would hold steady. Alan explained we'd add the video to the discovery packet and submit it to the prosecutor. Part of me wanted to call Rosa and thank her, but another part of me knew she'd already risked enough by coming forward. On the drive home, I kept wondering what Jason would do once he realized there was video proof. Would he finally admit it, or just invent a new lie? Halfway back, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, didn't have the strength for another excuse. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at the front door. I thought about how many times Jason had walked through it, how many times I had trusted him, never imagining he'd betray me like this. I wasn't even sure anymore if I loved him, or if I only loved the memory of who he used to be. I gathered the envelope, went inside, and set the USB on the kitchen table. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that every doubt, every fear, had been real. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept straight through. The hearing came faster than I expected. Alan told me I didn't have to testify, but I knew I'd regret it forever if I stayed silent. When I walked into the courtroom, Jason was already at the defense table, his head down like a child caught stealing. Claire wasn't there, which didn't surprise me after the video. Alan started first, laying out the timeline and presenting each document. When he played Rosa's video, I didn't watch the screen, I watched Jason. His jaw tightened, his whole face tense, but he never lifted his eyes. When the clip ended, Alan asked the court to weigh it alongside my sworn affidavit and the county records. Jason's lawyer tried to dismiss it, but the judge shut him down. Then, it was my turn. I swore the oath, sat up straight, and told the truth. I said I loved my son, that I had trusted him because he was family, that I never believed he would do this. I didn't cry, had no tears left. Jason didn't look at me once. His lawyer scrambled, saying Jason thought he had my permission, that it was a misunderstanding, that he only wanted to protect my future. It sounded paper thin. Finally, the judge asked Jason if he had anything to say. He stood, cleared his throat, and said he was sorry if I felt hurt, but that he only did what he thought was necessary. That was the moment something inside me closed. For good, he wasn't going to admit it, not really, because admitting it meant facing who he'd become. The judge called a recess to review the evidence. When she came back, her decision was firm. She ruled in my favor, froze the sale, and ordered the money returned pending criminal prosecution. Jason's face turned gray, but he still wouldn't look at me. As I gathered my papers, Alan touched my elbow and said, "You did the right thing." For the first time, I believed it. I walked past Jason without stopping, and when I reached the courthouse doors, I didn't look back. 3 days later, the funds were wired back into escrow, where they'd stay until the criminal case was finished. I didn't care how long it took, as long as Jason never saw a cent. I could wait. That evening, I came home to a message on my machine. It was Teresa. Her voice sounded softer, almost hesitant. She said she hadn't realized how serious it was, that maybe she should have listened before choosing his side. I didn't return the call. Part of me still loved Teresa, but another part of me knew she'd already shown where her loyalty lay when it mattered most. A week later, I drove to the bank to update the house title. The manager congratulated me for standing up for myself. It felt strange to be praised for something that had nearly hollowed me out, but I nodded and thanked him anyway. That night, I took out the old will I'd written after Harold died and replaced it with the new one Alan had prepared. Jason's name was gone. Teresa's, too. Everything would go to a local charity and a scholarship fund in Harold's name. I was tired of wondering whether my children loved me or only loved what I could give them. As I sat at the kitchen table reading the final draft, I felt a kind of relief I hadn't thought was possible. No more pretending, no more spin, just the truth, on paper. The next morning, Maria came over with pastries and hugged me so tightly my eyes burned. She said everyone in the neighborhood was talking about how brave I'd been. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a woman who had run out of excuses for the people she'd raised. After she left, I walked through each room, touching the chairs and the picture frames, reminding myself this house was still mine. Around noon, I spotted Jason out front, sitting in his truck with the engine running, like he couldn't decide whether to knock or drive away. I didn't open the door. I didn't wave. I just watched through the blinds until he finally pulled off the street. For the first time in years, I could breathe in my own home without waiting for the next crisis. That night, I slept with the deed folder tucked under my pillow, not because I feared he'd come back, but because it felt like proof my instincts had been right all along. The week after Jason disappeared, I started packing a few boxes, not because I was leaving, but because I needed to clear away the reminders of how long I'd been shrinking myself to keep the peace. I filled a box with photo albums, birthday cards, and the ceramic vase Jason had made in 3rd grade. I didn't throw them out, I just moved them to the garage, where I wouldn't have to see them every day. Alan called midweek to confirm the escrow funds would be released to me once the charges were settled. If Jason or Claire tried to contact me, I could refer them to his office. That alone felt like I'd finally put a lock on the part of my life they thought they could drift in and out of whenever it suited them. A few days later, a letter arrived in Jason's handwriting, uneven and rushed. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit anything. He just asked me to think about Claire's baby and whether she deserved to grow up without a grandmother. I set the letter on the table and stared at it until the words stopped sounding like concern and started sounding like a threat. Then I folded it and filed it away with the court papers. Not because I planned to respond, but because I wanted to remember exactly how he chose to end things. That weekend, Maria drove me to see a small condo by the marina. It wasn't fancy, but it had a bright kitchen and a balcony with room for a chair and a table. I signed the lease that afternoon. When I moved in, I only brought what mattered: my clothes, my papers, and the framed picture of Harold I'd kept by my bedside since the day he died. That first night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, listening to a quiet that didn't feel empty anymore. My phone was in the other room, on silent. I knew there would be messages, more guilt, more attempts to drag me back into old patterns, but I also knew I was done letting anyone else decide what I owed them. Before bed, I stepped onto the balcony and looked across the water at the lights. It struck me how simple freedom felt. All it took was losing the last illusion that family had to mean unconditional trust. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just ready for the part of my life where I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.